7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Education for the Livonia Public Schools Committee of the Whole meeting of February 8th, 2021. If you're tuning in to hear a discussion on the Board of Education on the items that are going to be coming before us for a vote, you've tuned into the right meeting. We have Committee of the Whole meetings where we discuss items at length. However, we do not vote on them. After we have really gotten every question out that we think we can, and we are ready to go to a vote, we put it on an agenda for the next meeting. So tonight you'll hear a lot of discussion about the items before the Board of Education. And if you'd like to hear the actual votes on these items, you'll have to tune in at our next general meeting, which is February 22nd. We are coming to you virtually tonight because it is a requirement from the state of Michigan. This Board of Education very much desires to be meeting in person. However, unfortunately, the way the law is written at this point in time, we are the only 7 individuals affiliated with Livonia Public Schools who are forbidden from meeting in person. At our last voting meeting, we did pass a resolution. We are working with our legislators. We are encouraging our governor and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to allow boards of education to meet in person, as our staff and students all are. As of this point, we are awaiting that permission, so we will be coming to you virtually. Please understand, we very much desire to be meeting in person. It is only because it is forbidden by law for us to do so that we are meeting virtually this evening. One other item we'd like to cover with everyone before we get into our meeting is respect. Respect is a character trait that we teach to our children on a very regular basis. We have one of our communities with character traits that we're teaching very much directs that respect be given student to student, adult to adult, and between adults and students. This Board of Education firmly believes in that principle, and we will be modeling it amongst ourselves, the presenters that come before the board, and we ask the same thing of any other individuals who do come before the board to present or to participate through audience communication on a regular basis. We find that to be the very best way to teach our children, is to model it ourselves. If you would like to get a copy of our agenda this evening, you can find it on our website. If you go to livoniapublicschools.org, go to the board tab, and you can follow the prompts to meetings and agendas to get a copy of our agenda that way. The first item on our agenda this evening is audience communications. To my knowledge, we do not have any audience communications this evening. Mrs. Jenkins, is that still correct?
I just did another quick check, and that is correct. We do not have any audience communications submitted via our form on our website.
Okay, great. And while we are meeting virtually, we are accepting audience communications virtually also. The next item on our agenda is our Committee of the Whole. The one item that we have under our Committee of the Whole this evening is the MASB Board of Directors. The MASB, or the Michigan Association of School Boards, has a board of directors that are elected throughout the state of Michigan. Livonia Public Schools falls in Region 8. We are very proud to have our own Dan Centers serving as one of the members at large. And thank you very much, Dan, for serving the state of Michigan and specifically representing Livonia Public Schools' interests on that board. It is obviously every single board member in this board has participated in certification classes, and we believe very strongly in the ideals of MASB. So we are proud, Dan, to have you serve on our behalf at that state level. In addition to Dan Centers, we do need to elect an individual for a 3-year term, and there are 4 people who are before us who have been nominated to fill a 3-year seat. And this Board of Education needs to select one of the 4 to choose to have our one vote for that 3-year seat at Region 8. I'd like to open it up at this point to have any comments from our board members on individuals that you feel would best serve in that seat. So are there comments at this time? Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Burton. Wow, what a great group of candidates that were put into this pool. I think there's 4 of them. They all look like they have wonderful qualities and have worked hard as board members and have lots of years of experience. I do know there's 2 that I'm looking at that I think would be great on the board. I know Birgit McQuiston has done a lot of service. I've seen her at a lot of MASB conferences and different things, so she's heavily involved. So I think she would be a great candidate. And I also believe that there's a candidate that we had some information on, Gina Walker. We had somebody, one of our community members recommended Gina, and I did read over all of her qualities, and it looked great too. So I would be, actually any 4 of them would be wonderful, but I think I would either choose Gina or Birgit to serve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Comments from other board members? Mr. Centers.
I actually was looking at the 2 same candidates Mrs. Bradford was. Mrs. McQuiston, I think we've seen her participate before. I think we may have even supported her in the past, if I recall correctly. However, Mrs. Walker also had a very good resume, and the recommendation from someone very involved in our education system who has good judgment, in my opinion, definitely carries some weight with me too. So those 2 candidates, I think, were very strong. And I feel like I would be comfortable supporting either of them. But you know, they all do look like they're really dedicated folks. So you know, I think either way we'll have some great representation on the board with any of those candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. Other board members? Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Burton. I feel similar as my colleagues. I think that while we have 4 candidates that are very good, 2 of them strike me as more exceptional. And looking at their resumes, they are comparable. Like Dan, I appreciate the input from members of our community. And, you know, especially if they're people who know these individuals more than we know them. We obviously, these are individuals, 3 of them are from Oakland County, so we don't even cross a lot of paths with them. So when we have somebody who can step forward and say, I know this person and this is what they're like, that's a very meaningful contribution. The other thing that struck me, all 4 of the candidates explored their vision for public ed and where we are in Michigan in terms of public ed. But there was only one candidate who spoke to being a representative and being a vehicle back and forth for communication, and that was Gina. And I liked that because it was different and it spoke to her comprehension of the role. So that leads me towards supporting Gina.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Mr. Johnson, I believe you also had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, President Burton. I agree with Mr. Centers. I think we have seen Ms. McQuiston before. She is certainly a very qualified candidate, as all 4 of them are. And doing some homework on them, I tend to look at the experience to a great extent. And I think the 2 candidates that we've already talked about, Ms. McQuiston and Ms. Walker, both have significant experience. They've got a lot of qualifications, and I could certainly go with either. I think at this point, I would lean more towards Gina Walker, given some of the input that we've seen. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Acosta, I believe you had your hand up.
Correct. Thank you, Mrs. Burton. I would also echo the sentiments. I was pretty impressed with the qualifications of the candidates. And being new to the board, I really am relying on our community input. And so I would also be voting for Gina Walker, or that's my input.
Okay. Other board members? Mrs. Bonnefield, did you want to weigh in, or are your thoughts already represented?
You guys have already covered it. I do like Gina, like the fact that Ms. Walker is very much into accounting and finances. And I think under the circumstances, especially with a lot of the stuff we heard on Saturday, that can only benefit what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Thank you. I hold the same opinion that has already been voiced. I think all four bring exceptional and differing qualities to the seat. Bridget McQuiston and Gina Walker both impressed me with their 9 and 10 years of experience as board members and their multiple MASB certifications. In my opinion, seeking to be a director of MASB, I put great value on the fact that both of these ladies have taken an awful lot of MASB classes. They have been heavily involved in the organization. And I believe if you're going to seek to lead the organization, it's important to be deeply embedded in it. Therefore, I believe that both of them are exceptionally qualified. That being, I honestly could go either way with Brigitte or Gina, and it looks like the majority of our board is more comfortable, like for lack of a better term, because both of them are very, very qualified, and that's already been stated. But it looks like more of our board is leaning toward Gina at this point. That's a nomination I could definitely support. So it looks like, do we have consensus that Gina Walker is going to be our nominee that we will vote on at our February 22nd meeting? Okay, I'm seeing a round of thumbs up from everyone, and that's who everyone has vocalized as being their choice. We will see that Gina Walker's name is put on our agenda for a formal vote on February 22nd. The next item is on our agenda is our Finance Committee, so I will turn the meeting over to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Burton. We have one item on the Finance Committee tonight, and that is going to be the Esser Grant update, and Mrs. Smith will assist us with that item.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield, and thank you, Board, for the opportunity to update you on the federal grants that we've received to date. So we have received two federal grants so far in response to the pandemic. The first is the Esser Grant. It's a formula grant that's allocated out to districts using the same method that the federal government uses to distribute Title I funds. And we've received just over $1 million worth of funds through that. We have received it, and we have used that money to put towards staff salaries. As you'll recall, back in the summertime, we were preparing for very significant budget cuts, and we identified these federal dollars as a way to maintain staffing so that we could minimize class size, not only for the academic benefit that provides, but also for the maximum physical distancing we could do with our students. So that's how we've used that $1 million. We also applied for an Esser Education Equity Grant, and unlike the first chunk of money, that was a competitive grant, so we had to compete against other districts for that money. And positive news on that, even from the time I wrote the memo last week, we received notice this morning that we've been approved for that grant, and that's just over $160,000 that the district will be using for additional mobile devices to replace some of our outdated Chromebooks that have started to slow down on us and reach their end of useful life. So that's something that Ms. O'Brien is working with the Technology Committee on. They'll finalize what type of mobile device would be best suited for our students, and then we plan to bring that purchase to the board in March. We've also gotten great news. The federal government approved a second round of Esser funds, and I should stop for those that aren't familiar with Esser. Esser stands for, and I'm going to read it because it doesn't roll off the tongue, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. So again, this was the federal government's response to the pandemic and helping districts get back on their feet and address the pandemic. So so just at the end of December, the federal government did authorize a second round of funding. 90% of the funds that they authorized are going to be allocated as a formula grant, similar to round one. And Michigan Department of Education has put out their estimate of what that'll mean for districts. And for our district, that's an additional almost $4.3 million. So really great news. There's also a remaining portion that the state has some discretion on how they're allocating that out. We've heard some rumblings of how they're going to allocate that, but we haven't seen anything finalized. This is, again, just what we're hearing, but the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators shared what they had heard as one of the possible methods, and that is taking into consideration our district's special education FTE, or their full-time equivalent of our students, as well as our overall FTE count. And if the state does move forward with that methodology, the Livonia Public Schools could see $5.9 million worth of additional funding for that. So these are two really great pieces of information. These aren't finalized. We haven't gotten any official notice that these are the final amounts, but these are what's being discussed right now. So we're excited to have discussions with the board. As you'll recall, in March, we'll be bringing a formal financial update to the board, and we'd love the chance at that time too to share with you some of our thoughts around how we could best utilize those dollars to serve our students. One other thing, I just want to plant the seed. Again, we'll talk about this further in March when we do our final or our financial update. We would like to talk with you about where would be the best place to record those funds and those expenditures. As you'll recall, in our proposed budget, we included the $1 million of Esser grants in the general fund to start with. But now that there is a second round of Esser funds coming, and they could potentially be pretty significant in nature, between those two allocations, that's about $10 million. Because it's a one-time in nature revenue, we would like to discuss with the board, would that make sense to put that over to our grant funds so that it doesn't have a kind of a funny effect on our general fund, that we'd see this blip in revenue and then have it go back down, the following year. There's something to say about putting it in our grants fund. I think there's some even more transparency, that you can see the total dollar amounts for that grant, as opposed to if it's in the general fund, we'd see it included on the federal grant revenue side. So that's something we'd like to, again, just get your wheels turning on that. Just give that some thought. And again, we'll bring some more discussion for you for that in March. But those are just a few of the good pieces. I will pause. I'll turn it over to Ms. Oquist if she wanted to add anything. I will mention as an aside, not officially Esser funds, but the district was also able to recognize funds that we received through our state aid payment. They were authorized at the actually after June 30th, so we didn't include it in our 1920 revenue per the auditors, but we did really receive $4.9 million through CRF funds, and that stands for Coronavirus Relief Funds. And again, we've used that so far for staffing in order to maintain our staff to minimize class size, for, again, the academic benefit that brings, as well as for physical distancing. So I'll pause there. That was a mouthful. I'd be happy to take any questions. And again, I can turn it over to Ms. Oquist in case she's has anything she'd like to add.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. You did a great job covering those funds. And just to note again, we've probably all read a lot about this. I know I've sent you numerous updates from the state and from our state organizations as we've received them. So we are awaiting that second round at both the state level and the federal level. There will be, it is time limited for the time in which we need to spend those funds. And again, for the specific purpose of, addressing really our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on our students and on our schools. And so certainly we'll be working closely with our leadership, both at the school level and the district level, so they can represent the needs of our students and then our staff in the schools. But at this point in time, the timeline for that is the expenditures being utilized by September of 2022. And so it's really only about 15 to 16 months that we would have to utilize those dollars. So we really need to think carefully about the impact of those funds, the intended use of those funds, and how we can truly make the most impact on the students we serve. This is not something that is an extended revenue stream, nor is it an extended period of time that we can say over the next 5 years, each year we're going to do this, every year for 5 years. And so we really need to think about that a little differently as you think about a relatively short period of time for a significant infusion of funds. And again, it is meant to address the impact on our students' academic, social, emotional, food and nutrition, as well as the needs of our schools. And so we'll be thinking carefully about that, and certainly watching closely as the state and the federal legislature completes that process for us.
Mrs. Bradford, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. Mrs. Oquist, you answered my question. I was going to ask if it was time sensitive and how long we had to spend those funds. And you answered that correct, or in a nice way. Thank you. I also have a question. Do we put this is information only, correct? So it won't be going to a vote or anything at this point?
It will not. When we, certainly in March, as we know more about this, we'll bring that as part of our budget update. But at this point in time, it does not need to move further on the regular agenda.
Okay. And one other question. So these funds, they might be used for, I know the state superintendent is putting a push on extending school year or doing some other things. Would these funds allow us to possibly do something like that, to use those funds for something like that, or an extended summer school program or something of that nature?
These funds are able to be utilized to support students during the summer months and to support students in summer programming, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Johnson, you have your hand up as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. 2 questions. Allison, you talked about where the funds would go. Mm-hmm. Does putting this money into the general fund have any impact on our fund balance? My concern is if this is a one-time, I don't want there to be that artificial bump that it looks like we have all of this additional money.
Yep. So if I'll give you 2 answers to that. So our grant fund rolls up with the general fund when it goes to the state. So we every fall have to roll up our ledger to them. And so if you see any like state reporting and whatnot, regardless of where we put the Esther funds, if it's in the general fund or the grants fund, it'll become part of the fund balances if it isn't spent by June 30th, which would be very hard to spend that before this June 30th. So most likely would be included. But as far as our internal books and what we see included in our financial statements and on our in our budget books, that would not be included in the fund balance if it was included in the grant. So we would avoid seeing that one-time blip, or increase in the fund balance and then have it, be lowered the next year, because these truly are funds that are meant to be spent. Obviously, because they're time limited, it's not something like we could hold on to and help us with the financial stability and building fund balance. They're intended to be used. So ultimately they will be spent, but that is definitely something to consider when we decide if it should be in the general fund or if it should be in the grants fund. We will see that temporary increase in our fund balance because of that.
Okay, that answers my question on that. The other one, going through the memo, the various uses for the money, and this may more be directed at Dr. Terrio. I noticed that one of the uses was for mental health services. Do you have any idea what type of additional resources or help we could get in that area with these funds?
Mr. Johnson, what we would look to do is to continue to add to our student services department with our mental health providers, primarily our school social workers and our school psychologists, to provide that direct care to our students. We may also look at providing an additional behavior interventionist along with Sarah Jacobson and Rick Dubé, who also provide that direct service to our students as well as our staff.
Yeah, obviously my concern is with what's been going on. That seems to be an extremely important issue right now with our students' mental health. And the more services that we can provide for those students, the better off we are. So thank you. That's all I had, Mrs. Bonifield.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Bradford, turn your hands off once you're done. There you go. Oh, good job. And then Mr. Centers has his hand up.
So thank you. I think one thing that I've heard from superintendents is that not only is there a time frame on spending this money, but in order to properly plan and staff, it's very important for our legislators to know that in order to plan for a summer program, you can't get the money on June 29th. And I know our state senator knows that very well. She's had conversations with Andre and others, but it's also critically important that when they're making staffing decisions for the fall and for next year. So I think doing this along with the regular budget timeline, which, is set to, midsummer, end of June, is when the legislature is aiming to get that done. I think that really sets our students back, and we need to do that, get the money out sooner. So any kind of communication to Lansing around those regards, I think, is just critically important. This is money that's passed through. It could be passed through very quickly. So at least the Title I portion should be very quick, I would say. The other, maybe there's a little more conversation about how to distribute it, but the Title I is very straightforward. So hopefully that's the case, because Mrs. Oquist, I think, is going to expand on what I'm saying here, but I just wanted to share that.
Mrs. Oquist, did you want to expand on that, or?
I do, just to follow Mr. Centers so that it makes sense. So certainly one of the things that we've had some extended conversation with other superintendents and our local legislators about over the past couple of weeks is the importance of getting these funds to local districts so that we are able to address the needs of the students in front of us now, and to be able to plan accordingly for the summer and for the fall. And so we've seen discussion over the course of the past several weeks about policy initiatives being tied into budgetary decisions. And it is absolutely essential that we all have our voices heard, and that we are really cohesive in the message that the release of these funds, claiming these funds at the state level, and then releasing them out to local districts to utilize as defined by either the federal or the state government is essential. And that waiting multiple months as the time ticks away between now and September 22nd really hinders our ability to really think deeply and plan for and know how we can move forward in meeting the needs of our students. So I would encourage certainly our board, our staff, and our community members to support the message that a focus on these budgetary decisions being made as budget decisions to be able to help provide relief to our students and our schools, to be able to meet the needs of our learners this year and next year. We need to be able to plan to do that as soon as possible. And so we would welcome you reaching out as well at the state level to be sure that we're sending that message that this is a time to focus on getting those dollars and those funds to local school districts, and to be able to utilize them to support our learners both now and in this coming year.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. I'm going to take a little bit. I know there's a couple other hands that are up. So with our ability to have a nice fund balance, we have a little bit of cushion there. So when we're talking that these funds aren't going to be released until maybe June, is there any way that we can plan ahead of time, put those programs in place over the summer, and then as the money is released in June, or are we not able to pre-plan or pre-spend that money? Do we have to wait to get that money before we take any action, or can we preemptively take action, especially for the summer? Again, the timing, it's not going to do us, well, it always does good, but our immediate need right now is to get opportunities for these kids to do some catching up, if we can at all do that this summer. And if it's a very impactful window of opportunity that we have. Can you talk to that just a little bit?
Sure. And you do bring up a very good point about the fact that we do have a healthier fund balance allows us to do things like that and even have discussions like that, because the truth is, if our fund balance was under 5%, who knows if we could, float it until we knew when the grants would be coming through. But yeah, if Esser 2, the round 2, is anything like the first round, once it was approved, they made it retroactive back to the day I believe it was authorized by the federal government. So that went back. We could even go back all the way to March, I think, when it passed to do the funds. So I would assume that it would work the same way with the Esser 2 funds. We could probably backdate it and use them for things maybe as early as December 27th when it was approved by the legislators. But that would definitely be something I could run by MDE beforehand, so we could get their blessing on it if we wanted to move forward with planning. I should bring up one thing I didn't clarify or didn't state. Unlike some of the coronavirus relief funds we received through the state aid, that simply came to us as part of our state aid payment. With the Esser grant, it's on a reimbursement basis. And so we don't request the funds until we've expended the cost or incurred the cost. So with that said, as I'm thinking through what that could mean in terms of our fund balance, truly we won't see a $10 million increase in our fund balance on June 30th, because again, to recognize the revenue, we would have had to incur the cost for that. So that could be something we'll keep in the back of our mind too.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Burton, I believe you were next with your hand up. President
Yes.
Burton.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, following up on your comment that you just gave us. So are you saying that we do need to expend those funds before we receive them?
Typically, how we do with our is similar to like the title grant. We request that every 2 weeks, typically after a payroll. So once we've paid employees, then we'll submit a request right away and we get it within a couple days from the state. So that would be the same case with these Esser grant funds.
Okay, so in a case like this, we do know for sure we will get those funds though, correct? We're not being asked to spend the funds and then hope we get reimbursed.
Definitely for the portion that's the 90%, which is, I believe, the $4.2 million. Again, we haven't received an official letter here in the district, but they did say that that would be allocated to districts like the Title I funds. And we saw estimates from the state. So I feel pretty confident we're going to see that $4.2 million coming to us. It's that other piece that the state has some discretion on how they give that to the districts. I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending to the board that we plan expenditures based on that, because that is truly still up for determination. So definitely feel confident with the 4.2. And I think the other portion of it, we should wait until we have some further instruction from the state.
Okay. And the other portion you're talking about is the 5 million that or it looks like the 5 million at this point.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And then along the lines of your thought of putting that into grant funds as opposed to just the general fund, which I do understand and agree with you on that. My question to you also is, some of that money that we've received already, do we have the option, even though we have currently put it in the general fund, can we go back and now put it into this general fund instead and recognize that income and expenditures out of the general fund or out of the grant fund? Or since it's already gone into the general fund, does it have to stay there?
Nope, we definitely have the authority to move it or have the ability to move it over. And that would be something I would present to the board. And then assuming the board approves that in our next budget amendment, we could move those revenues and expenditures over to the grant fund.
Okay.
So
especially because,
out there. Yep.
pardon me?
So that is a simple journal entry for us. So right now the cost has been incurred in the general fund, but it would be a very simple process to move it over to the grant fund.
Okay. Because as you've been saying, especially because this is really one-time money, it does make a lot of sense for that to be seen as income and expenses out of that grant fund if we have that option.
Mm-hmm.
My other question to you, the money that we are getting that's based off of our number of special education full-time equivalent students, do I assume correctly that that's how they figured the money, but that we have the option of using it on our special education or our general education students? Or is it exclusively, are you hearing anything about it exclusively being tied to our special education students?
Nope, you are correct, Ms. Burton. I haven't seen anything tying it to a specific, that it has to be used for special education students. And, I think as we all know, special education isn't 100% funded right now. So, so right now we get, I'm trying to think of the percentage, I think it's 32% reimbursement from the state for our local special education programs. And the rest obviously comes out of our general fund. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that, we're taking anything away from our special education students, but
right.
Yes, we would have the flexibility. They have a pretty broad range of how the funds can be used. Again, the intent and the spirit was to recognize the additional costs that the districts are incurring with different mitigation factors, purchasing PPE, as well as, seeing the needs that have arisen in our students, both on the social emotional side and on the academic side. So these funds are really intended for us to try to bridge that gap that's formed and close that gap. So.
Okay, great. Alrighty, because absolutely our special education students are going to be in some significant need of this, the help that these funds can bring. Mm-hmm. And our general education students are also going to need it. So, mm-hmm. All right.
It's similar, President Burton, to yes. The Title I formula. And so utilizing, in this particular case, that it is not limited to only students who receive Title I services or qualify for them. So it's a way in which they determine, as a district, the amount you would be receiving, but you can utilize those funds on all of the students in your care.
Okay, great. Because after COVID, all of our students are going to need this extra care. Thank you.
Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, Ms. Bonnefield. I kind of wanted to tag to the socially emotional part that Mr. Johnson was mentioning, and maybe asking if it's possible to also include diversity and inclusion programming. I think that also kind of helps us to support our students in every way possible. So I'd like to see if we can do that, even if it also includes some more training and programming over the summer for some of our staff, but I'd like to see that implemented as well.
Thank you, Ms. Acosta. Allison, I have a question about hiring. So we have an opportunity with these limited funds and having to use them in a very short time period to perhaps be able to really beef up those areas that have been so impacted, the social emotional, extra help with catching up on reading, all of these different areas. Do we have the ability to hire individuals with that time frame in mind? Because where I'm going with this is, we always talk about wages and the long-term cost of that, and that we can't necessarily maintain that. We've been warned about that. Do not really start creating a lot of legacy costs that we're not going to be able to maintain. Are we able to make those personnel hires and either have them as a short-term hire with the understanding that, it's a limited time, or, is that going to cause any conflicts with our our contracts, and how can we kind of work through that to be able to really get the individuals into the buildings to be able to help our students to, you know, kind of overcome some of this from the last year.
Yep. I think we find ourselves in a very good position as a district when we look at the experience level of our teaching staff. So I think we all here know, you know, the best thing for kids is obviously having caring adults in front of them, you know, helping them more than one time, like a software purchase or something like that. It's really, you know, extra bodies in the classroom. If we had all teachers at the, you know, very beginning of their careers, there might be a fear that we wouldn't have retirements to potentially help us offset if these funds, you know, when they do run out. I'm not explaining this very well, but to say, you know, we felt confident moving forward with getting new hires, because every summer we do have teachers that it's time, you know, that they've chosen to retire. And so that's always an option for us, that when teaching staff do retire, we have that option of, do we have the funds to replace them, or is that something that has to just not get filled? And so I think it would be responsible for us to recommend to the board using these federal funds for staffing, because we always have that opportunity when folks retire to reevaluate if we can continue to, you know, have that position, or if that's something that we have to scale back on again because, you know, funds have gone away. So I hope that answers your question. So we aren't looking at, for instance, the staff that was hired over the summertime. Nobody that I know of was hired just for a short-term basis. You know, they were all hired in as regular full-time staff. And again, we didn't hire them thinking that they would only be here for a year. We do think that we'll have positions available for the staff. And again, if something happens and the revenue for the district changes, we can always use that natural retirement process to help adjust the expenditures.
Okay, and I guess part of where I'm going is not necessarily the classroom teachers. It would be more of social workers and some of those positions where there really isn't a lot of retirements, where I'm thinking that, you know, we really beef up some of these areas where we're very short on people, but that when the funds run out, we may not be able to maintain that number of additional staffing.
And I was
Okay.
just going to say, so even on the ancillary staff side, as Jen can attest with the amount of hiring that she does, you know, we do see a lot of, you know, either people resignations or retirement. So even if we did some ancillary hiring of social workers, psychologists, we tend to have some, you know, I think the turnover sounds like a bad thing, but, you know, just again, a natural thing of retirements and whatnot. And I saw Ms. Oakquist probably had something she wanted to add.
I just thought I would just grow on what you shared, and talk just briefly that while certainly we would concur that being able to add additional supports, human resource supports, whether that's teachers, mental health providers, additional supports for our students in our schools to intervene for both behavioral or social, emotional, or academic needs. We also have the opportunity and would likely look at to balance some of that with also opportunities for professional development, as Mrs. Acosta had just referred and talked about professional development opportunities and other areas of growth that it may be a multiple expenditure, but over a period of time. And so while we look at utilizing some of these dollars, we certainly will we anticipate utilizing some of them to add some additional staffing. We also look at opportunities for students or opportunities for staff to learn and grow in ways that we can best meet the needs of the children entrusted to us. And so that may be, again, through summer opportunities to be able to support our learners, after school or before school support, opportunities for our staff to continue to learn and grow in how to best meet the needs of all of our students. And so while a good portion of that may be in staffing, we also will look to balance some of the impact of that, knowing that it's a short-term revenue source, with also resources, materials, professional development opportunities that really help us to continue to get better at what we do so that we can help better meet the needs of our children. And we'll see, as Mrs. O'Brien shares with us this evening, there are certainly some areas that we'll want to continue to target, both in our academic support as well as our mental health supports.
Okay. And one question that goes way, way back to the beginning of the discussion was, I think we're spending some money on some Chromebooks that we're replacing. Has the market gotten a little better with, have they been catching up so that we can get those on a timely basis?
I think the Chromebook market has gotten better, and I think one thing that's helped Livonia too is that we've broadened our scope and of the different mobile devices that we use. We found some other devices that have served our students even more than the Chromebook. So we brought some HP things. I'm trying to think if it was a Microsoft Surface Pros we brought for the kindergartners and first graders this fall. And so we've had the opportunity now to try out a lot of different devices. And I think because we have found a number of things that work for the district, that gives us an easier time of securing these computers for our students.
Okay. And Mrs. Bradford, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yep, I just want to do a follow-up. So Dan spoke about our legislature, and so did Mrs. Oquist, regarding when they're going to release these funds. And you're saying that they must be utilized by September of 2022. Does that mean all the money must be spent? So if we get this 4.2 million, we don't know when we're going to get it, because isn't it, if I'm correct right now, it's tied up in some bureaucratic problems? Are they tying, am I talking about the same funding? It's being tied up into other things, or we know we're going to be getting this 4.2 at least? Because that's a really quick turnaround. So by the time we try to utilize some of that money, let's say we want to hire some social workers, psychologists, some staffing to help our students. Are we saying that all has to be spent by September of 2022, and we couldn't use it into that year? Or can you clarify?
Sure. I know if it works like traditional grants, it would need to be spent by September 30th, 2022. I did hear rumblings, I think from somebody at MDE, that there was talks that if you've identified what you're going to use the funds for as of September 30th, that they might allow you to expend it beyond September 30th, 2022. But that was just speculation. So I think conservatively, we should plan on it needing to be spent by September 2022. And then, that would be a nice thing for districts, obviously, if we did have some additional time to spend it, because as we all are trying to do, we want to be wise, stewards of the funds.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It just seems, while we're so appreciative of the funding, no doubt about it, it's the executing of it and getting it put in the right spot and how we're going to utilize it that is so critical. And to me, it seems to put a date, it has to be used by 2022. I get that it's relief funds, but this could, obviously, these issues extend beyond 2022. So it's a little frustrating to me. I'm glad to get the money. I'm not saying we aren't grateful for it, but I think utilizing it, like Mrs. Oquist said, we need to know when we're going to get this so we can plan. It's all about planning and how we're going to get it into the hands, and so it best serves the needs of the students. So I just get concerned about that. So just my opinion on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my board friends, I don't see any more hands. Are we good with our one finance item? Excellent. And then President Burton, we are finished with the Finance Committee tonight.
Terrific. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is item 4, Curriculum Committee, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Burton. For item 4A, we have the annual education report, and Mrs. O'Brien will lead us in that discussion.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. I sent the board an electronic version of our annual education report. Typically at a committee of the whole, I would bring you a paper copy and we would kind of walk through the changes. I am going to walk through a few parts of our annual education report, but before I start, I just want to remind you. So the annual education report is a state requirement that all schools and all districts must follow the template given by the state. It has certain data points that we put into it each year, and then we pull data that is from last year. So one of the things when I started this position was we used to name the annual education report. So this year's would have been called the 1920 annual education report because the data is from 1920. What we did is because it's 2021, we name it by the school year that we're in, the 2021 annual education report. And there are a few data points that are from this year, like parent-teacher conferences and the number of staff that we have. But our data, both local and state data, is old. And typically it would be old from last spring, the spring of 2020. Because there was no testing from the spring of 2020, all of the data is from 2019. So as you also know, when we get our spring data, when we get our M-STEP results, I present to the board as soon as we get them and we analyze them. With Mr. Hillard's help, we analyze them typically within the first couple of months when they're released, or the first couple of weeks that they're released. So again, I'm going to walk you through some of the major parts of the annual education report, but most of the information that is in this is old. So it's just the way this report works from the state, but there are some things that have been updated, and so I'm just going to kind of walk you through. So the first page is a required cover letter that we utilize the template for, and it is exactly, we have to follow it by the state. And the only thing that we personalize is the fourth paragraph where we explain what the second section of information is about. So we've added that statement in there because we felt it was needed for clarification. Beginning on page 2, we are required to report the key initiatives from each school as reported by the schools in their annual education report. So each school updates theirs each year, and we just copy from theirs what they've noted as their key initiatives. Another part of this section is we identify any schools that have been identified as targeted support improvement schools or additional targeted support schools or comprehensive support school. We have one school, Franklin High School, that is a targeted support improvement school. That identification is from 2019. There were no additional identifications last year, again, because we had no state testing. And Franklin's identification came from their subgroup of special education students. So if you have one subgroup that is below or at the bottom 30%, then you need to be a targeted support improvement school. And the district is responsible for working with the school to improve that area. So Mr. Pacey and I have met and we have worked on his school improvement plan and are prepared for the next round of testing so that we can improve in that area and then make gains so that he would not need to be a targeted support improvement anymore. So pages 2 through 10 through 11 are all of our schools' key initiatives. So again, that information is from each school's annual education report. Beginning on page 12 is our district profile. That section, the heart of our mission, students, that part has been updated this year with our current numbers of students at each level of the district. And we did personalize this and add the number of students that are in Livonia virtual this year. So we just pulled out of our elementary numbers, our secondary numbers, the number of students who have chosen Livonia virtual this year. It also lists the number of employees and the different roles that we have across the district. The next following 3 pages are our mission, our shared vision, and our collective commitments. So instead of retyping them into the form, we just share our posters that we include in our district work. Page 16 is our district school improvement information. And again, because of last year, we don't have new school improvement data. Our goals were 3-year goals anyway, so they were from 2018 to 2021. So we will be reviewing as a choir team this year how we're doing on those goals and making determinations of what adjustments we would want to do. We also have our shared vision goals. So you remember in 2019-20, we reviewed and refreshed our shared vision, and we set some some priority areas, and those are listed there from that year too. So those are multi-year priority areas that we list as a part of our shared vision. And then on the next page, just a little bit about our district school improvement team and what its role is. That's the same as previous years. A review of our accreditation, the years we've been accredited, 2009, 2014, and then in 2019. And the next several pages is just a list of our core curriculum areas as listed in our parent brochures that we share with parents at parent-teacher conferences. So those are already data points that are public with our community. Page 20 is where we would normally spend some time looking over our district benchmark assessments. So utilizing our kindergarten early learning benchmarks, our F&P running record levels, and our iReady scores. So again, we have no end of year data last year. And in a few minutes, I will share with you the mid-year and the fall data for iReady. And so this section is nothing new. It has no new updated data as of yet. Hopefully we'll have spring testing, and we will have some new information to be sharing with you after spring. We also have a middle school ELA common assessment, which we actually were revising last year in committee, and we did not get a chance to give that common assessment for the first time last year. So our in our district teams, our middle school 7th and 8th grade ELA teachers are working on common assessments right now. So we'll be giving those this spring. We also give iReady at the middle school. So we have some 2019 iReady scores from middle school there and at math. And then we have a social studies assessment that we developed in 18-19 that we have those scores there. Again, that was not given in the spring, but it is it was revised and realigned with our new social studies textbooks that year. And so we've given that once so far, and we will give that again this year. And then our COGAT scores for the 2018-19 school year are also listed there. On page 23, well, at the bottom of page 22 and 23, that data is current. So you need to list 2 years of parent-teacher conference, the number of parents who attend, and the percent of parents. So we did list our fall participation at the elementary and the secondary level for the past 2 falls. We did not have spring conferences last year at the secondary level. We do not have them at the elementary level. Our last paragraph is on our PTA and our PTSA council, just some information about that as a part of our annual education report. We list our parent involvement board policy, On page 24, just a list of our specialized programs at the elementary, middle, and high school. That information is the same. And what schools are listed as Title I. There's a change there. Kennedy Elementary is not a Title I school this year, and Emerson Middle School is not a Title I school this year. So those two schools are not listed in this year's annual education report. And then the last page just reviews what data we typically download from the Michigan Department of Education. So this is also a requirement. There, through My School Data, there is a data set that you must link to your annual education report. And the link is at the bottom of that page. So it has typically our MSTEP scores, our SAT, PSAT scores, our My Access scores in there. This year's data doesn't have any of those scores in there. But what it does list, and I did a comparison to last year's annual education report. All of the data set that is linked there is last year's data. So it matches last year's annual education report. So the graduation rates are from 2019. As a comparison from 2016 to 2019. And then the targets of graduation requirements that the state sets for us, which we were almost there as it is. There's a list of the number of degrees staff hold. That is from last year's data. So new staff that we hired this year, they're not listed in this data set from the state. There's a chart of inexperienced teachers. Our new teachers that we hired this year are not listed there. Inexperienced teachers, inexperienced principals, so the number of years they've been a teacher or been a principal. The number of certificates, emergency or provisional certificates, that is listed there, but it is also from last year. And then teachers who teach out of their field, that is from last year. And then the last set of data is our NAEP scores from 2019 for 4th grade and 8th grade reading and math. And so it is my hope that the next time I present the annual education report, we will have new data, but I also hope that after this spring's testing, whichever, whether it's state testing or local assessment testing, that I'll be able to share with you sooner than February of 2022 how we did at the end of the 2021 school year. So I will open that up to any questions that you have about the annual education report.
Mrs. Acosta? Oh, you're muted.
Go ahead, President Burton.
Okay. This is obviously a question new to this year. Is there any reporting that we have to do as a school district with comparing our students who are being taught in person to our students who are being taught virtually, basically who are choosing the virtual option? Obviously, our in-person students have gone back and forth with in-person and remotely. But is there any state reporting that is required of us to compare our in-person versus our virtual learning?
So our next item is our mid-year benchmark, and that is required by the state of Michigan. And we do report how our students who are in Livonia virtual, we pull out their scores separately.
Okay. But as far as the annual report, at this point, our annual report will be able to combine all of our students together. Got it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Mrs. O'Brien, when we put these annual education reports together, and by the way, it's really thorough, and I just compliment you on such a great job for all the information. It's right at your fingertips for any family member or parent to read. I think it's wonderful. So this gets sent out to who gets this report and what do they do with the report? And also this report, is this will be available online for our community members to look at their own leisure?
Yes, so it is required that you have it posted to your district website, and each school posts theirs to their website. Mrs. Jenkins does a really nice job creating a portal for all parents to be able to go and get the annual education reports each year. And it used to be that each elementary school and secondary school was required to present it at a public meeting. They are not anymore. They just must be required to have it on their website and available a hard copy for any parent who requests. We are required to present our annual education report each year publicly, just like this.
Okay, and follow-up question. So this report, are we going to report it at the regular meeting, or this is the report?
This is the report.
This is the report. And one other question. So other school districts this year obviously are going to have, they're going to have their data is the same time frame and everything. So every district across the state will not have a 2019 or 2020 report due to COVID. All their testing, since it was state mandated and we didn't run the testing, it will be completed, like you said, in the spring. So we're going to get some spring information, but that spring information will then go into 2021, 22 school year. Is that how that's going to work?
Yes. So the data for this spring, if we give state testing, will get accumulated and put into a data set that we would then attach to next year's annual education report. So it's always 6 to 8 months behind. And so prior to next year's annual education report, I'll be sharing with you our results when they get released much sooner than this. So they're just always, this report is typically at this time of the year, but the data is very old in this report.
Okay, and sorry, so many questions.
No,
one more. The spring testing. So do we know from the state whether or not they're going to mandate the testing? Do we have any information on that?
So we are, Superintendent Oquist, do you want to say?
Oh, go ahead.
So the state of Michigan is filing a waiver with the federal government to not do spring testing. So at this point,
due to the situation that we're in, we're hoping that well, not hoping, but of course we want to do some assessments, but given the circumstances, it's a little difficult to do the assessments when we're trying to catch our students up to what we need to get them to.
Yes, so there's actually, we're in a public comment or public feedback right now about that waiver, sending it to the federal government. I think Superintendent Oquist, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I would echo that. And the window is open right now, and the state is seeking input and feedback. And so the window, I believe, is open until February 12th to send information to the MDE. It's widely available on their website. But the state superintendent has sent to the federal government a request to waive standardized testing for the spring. So that would not waive all testing. So if folks are listening, it's not as though we would not have either an opportunity to take a look at where our students are on our benchmark testing or our testing such as iReady, which we will conduct regardless of the determination on standardized testing. One of the things that the state has looked at is the variance of opportunity that students have had to access education across the state and across each school in each level, and whether or not, one, it is appropriate to utilize those same measures in this school year, but two, also we have many districts in different modalities at this point in time and making transition points at different places. Additionally, we are pretty, protective of that time we have remaining in this school year with our students, and to spend multiple days on standardized testing is also not the best use of time. And so Those are some of the things that our state superintendent has shared with the federal government. We have not received word on that waiver. So at this point in time, we are still planning for the administration of the MME and the M-STEP. However, if we do not move forward with standardized testing, we will still be assessing our learners, and we will still have data to compare from fall to mid-year to end of the year. But again, we believe that those assessments will be much more useful to be able to inform our instruction going forward and to be able to support our learners with the gaps that they may have.
Yes, I totally agree with that. So we would still be obviously testing our students, and we just wouldn't be mandated by the state to turn in that document, because we do use iReady in our district, and that also we use it for our statewide assessments also. So it would be more local. We would be in district testing our students to find out what levels they're at and where we need to move forward and continue. Correct?
Yes, so we would continue. We have already given iReady 2 different times. We've done running records at the elementary level. Our secondaries have been doing common assessments. We're actually doing COGAT testing at the middle school right now, and we already did it at our upper elementaries. So our own local controlled assessments, we are giving. It's
That's
just
great.
whether or not we would give M-STEP and MME,
In my
required
access.
by the state.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. In reading the report earlier today, I was reading the key initiatives, Mrs. O'Brien, and I know the data is old. Are the key initiatives current?
So each school was sent their annual education report from last year and asked to update it and to look at their school improvement goals. But just like at the district level, many schools are carrying over the same ones from last year because they didn't get a data point to say, how are we doing on our goals last spring? So many of the both goals and initiatives are the same as last year, but each principal reviewed this and sent us what they're working on at the building level.
Okay, so they may have updated it based on whatever they could, but there was some carryover in it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you. Ms. Bonnefield, I wasn't sure if you had your hand raised. Okay. Any other questions? That concludes 4A.
And Mrs. Acosta, do you want to go ahead and lead into 4B?
Yes, so 4B is the mid-year benchmark data update. Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes, thank you. So we do have some current data that I would like to share with you. And this form is part of our continuity of learning plan and is required that we report our mid-year benchmark data, and we are using iReady as a part of our continuity of learning benchmark data. I do want to caution you that we just finished testing on Friday, and Mr. Hillard and myself collected all of this data, but we really haven't had a chance to analyze it. So I've had some ahas as I look at it, but as a district, we have data dives and we dig into like, what's the why? What is, why do we think the data is saying what it is saying? And then at the building levels, they'll have school improvement team and grade level team data digs that they'll look at this data. But if you look at the extended COVID learning plan, last summer, we set our mid-year goals utilizing iReady. So iReady has a typical growth, an individualized typical growth that each student, based on their initial diagnostic, it sets a goal for them to reach by the end of the year. So our mid-year goal was that all of our students would reach their 50% mark on that goal. I'm also going to report to you just the achievement, the percent of students who are achieving right now. But that typical growth goal means students who have hit it's based on a median. So that's the middle number. How many students have gotten to the median of their grade level or of their of that content level? So below 50% is that they haven't gotten to that midway point. Above 50% is that they are above the median number when we look at that. So the first chart has both reading and math, and at one of our board meetings, you asked me to bring previous year data also. So I have on this chart the fall beginning of the year score for iReady. So if you look, this is the achievement. The first one is achievement. It shouldn't say achievement or growth, because the second chart, Mr. Hillard made the growth chart. So the first chart is achievement, the percent of students who are at or above grade level at the beginning of the year and at the mid-year. So I'm just going to talk about the mid-year, and then if you have questions about the fall. So if in reading, 50% of our students who are at or above grade level as a district average. So that would be K through 9. And we gave it this year at 9th grade because our 8th graders didn't have a score. We do not have to report their 9th graders when we break out our data. It really was for our own data point for us to see how those students did, since we didn't have an end of year score. Our economically disadvantaged students, 37% of them are at grade level or above. 19.6% of our special education, 31.4% of our English language learners, 53.5% of females, 46.9% of our males, 52.7% of our white students, 29.4% of our Black students, 57.1% of our Asian students, 43.9% of our Hispanic students. And then Mrs. Burton, to your question, Mr. Hillard pulled out the students who are 100% remote. So 55.5% of them are at or above grade level, and 48% who were 100% not remote at grade level. So those are the reading scores for the benchmark assessment that just finished last week on the iReady diagnostic. And then math is also listed there. And I mean, I can read those all also, or we can just talk about them. And then if you turn, or your second page for you, this is the one that's on their typical growth. So our goal was that students would be beyond the 50% mark at halfway point of the year. That's where we're at. And so our overall average of all students in reading are right just above 50%, and our overall average of students in math is 48.4%. So we are not quite, we don't have as many students who have hit their mid-year typical growth in math. And then we broke those data points all out by our subgroup also. So this is required reporting for our continuity of learning plan for this year. And it is, a part of it is reporting your students who are 100% remote. Questions on our data? And that
Mrs. O'Brien, would you share the mode in which students took the assessments, please?
Sure. So in the fall, students were taking it, mostly they took it at home. The last week of testing was the first week as we started to come back. So I know some elementary teachers gave the assessment the first week of October when we were back in person. So again, even if you're in Livonia virtual or in person, you took the fall assessment at home. And then the mid-year assessment, the students who were in person took it in person, and the students who were in Livonia virtual took it from home virtually. What the Livonia virtual teachers did is they started students, I'll take kindergarten out for a minute because they have not taken that test before, but our first grade through ninth grade students started the test together on a Zoom if I'm in Livonia Virtual or on a Google Meet. Teachers went over the process, helped students get started, and then stayed on with students. Sometimes it takes students more than a class period. And so some students finished iReady on their own, some finished it within the time period with their classroom teacher.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Mrs. O'Brien, looking at the first chart, and I want to make sure I'm looking at this correctly, although you indicated it should just be achievement. If I'm looking at the fall and then the mid-year,
Yep.
there seems to be at least moderate growth in just about every one of the areas. Am I reading that correctly?
You are. Yep. We do have growth between the fall assessment and the winter assessment. We have a larger growth in reading than we do in math. Our students are not performing as well in math, but there is growth across the district.
Yeah, even with math, although you're right, it's not as much as reading. We are seeing an increase in the math scores then.
Yes, so this is the percent of students who are at grade level. So math, in the fall, we had 29.3% of students district average, so that's a lot of kids averaged together, who were at grade level, and 44% at the mid-year mark. So that's about 15 points, 15 points growth, the percent growth of the students who are at grade level.
Okay, and obviously it's not as high as we'd like to see it, but we are seeing growth, which I think is encouraging.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I was reading it correctly. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Centers?
So there's been a lot of talk about data integrity when these tests are not being facilitated, by the teacher in person. Certainly, there's probably some irregularities, I would say. How much do you think that affects the data, especially from the fall? And two, from hearing the Senate Education Committee last week, I've heard there's a consensus through the state that reading scores have not been impacted as much as math scores, so I think that's interesting. That seems to be a statewide trend. So I just wanted to, mention that.
So we saw the same thing definitely in the fall, that our reading scores were a bit stronger than our math scores. Typically, our reading scores are stronger in the spring. So by the end of the year, our reading scores are pretty strong, and our math scores are a little bit weaker. I'll be really honest. This is data we've never, experienced, that the testing situations have been so different in different places that I can't make a lot of analyzing this data in the way we have previously. So Mr. Green and myself and the elementary principals need to dig in and look at the data at the building levels. They need to look at the data down to the classroom level. So, what are the scores for the LV teachers at each building compared to their in-person? But it is data. It is the one nice thing about iReady, it gives us some strengths and challenges that we can do some instructional shifts on. And I think that's an important piece of this. The other piece is that we have purchased iReady Instruction this year as that additional asynchronous time for elementary students. So is that an impact? We need to dig into the buildings that maybe have utilized it more than other buildings or less, and kind of discern that. But since all of this data, the window just closed Friday and we knew we needed to present today, we haven't had an opportunity to have all those conversations, but there's lots of conversations that I think could be very powerful for us to dig in and have.
Thank you, Ms. Burton.
Yes, the question I had, when we're talking about at grade level, when we're testing our students in the fall at grade level, is that for the beginning of, say, 4th grade, for example, or is that grade level, is that we're testing them where they should be at the end of 4th grade, for example?
That's a great question. So iReady gives us 3 different ways of looking at the data. Beginning of the year, the standard view, so that's holding them to what the standard is for the grade level, and then the end of the year view. So rather than have 2 different views, I use the standard view for both of these charts. So that would really mean looking at the grade level standard. So end of the year, what the end of the year does is it takes kids who are at the beginning of the year, and it actually kind of drops them to being a grade level below, because they are just at the beginning of 1st grade when we're at the end of 1st grade. The standard view still holds that student as just slightly below. They'd be in the yellow instead of in the red when we're looking at the standard view. So I wanted to make sure that I use the same view with both sets of data.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused at the difference between standard view and end of the year.
So end of the year view, right? So if it's May and I'm taking the iReady assessment, then it's expected that I've had all of 1st grade curriculum.
Right.
So a student who is at early 1st grade, which is a designation in iReady, on the standard view, they are still on grade level. At the end of the year view, they kind of fall off as on grade level, and they are listed as below grade level because we're already at the end. If they're just holding on to the beginning, they're not at grade level right now because we're at the end. And so it's just taking that same band and kind of shifting the expectation throughout the year. And so standard view just kind of is the formal middle way to look at the data.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else? I wanted to say too that having been in the classroom as a remote substitute teacher at the beginning of the school year, I was kind of concerned about what the comparison of the scores between the beginning of the school year and mid-year, that maybe they would drop off if they had received some additional support at home while taking the testing. So it's really encouraging to see that when they took their mid-year assessment, those that were face-to-face, that there was growth. So eliminating that fear in terms of
and we had all those same fears ourselves, not knowing exactly what this year's data would look like. So I have one more data chart that I sent you that was something you requested when I was preparing to present today's mid-year data, and I showed you what the fall data was. You had asked, could it be broken out by grade level? So you have that, and I listed, again, I used only standard view. The chart on the left has the past 3 years fall data, and the chart on the right has the past 3 years mid-year data. So it does have this year's reading data, and then the second page has the math data. And again, it's hard to make assumptions about this data. There's some grade levels that are higher than I would have expected. There's some areas that are typical scores as in any other year, and I wouldn't assume those things, but I'm trying to be careful about making assumptions without us really digging in to the data a little bit more down to the building level and the classroom level, because again, these are averages across the district.
Mr. Centers, did you have a question?
No, I forgot to put it down. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions about the new data? No. Ms. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. I just wanted to thank you, Mrs. O'Brien, for all of this data. And I do agree with Mr. Johnson. And you, it's encouraging. We do have a lot of work to go, because when you look at the actual averages, of course, we would like them to be higher. But if we're looking at the growth, it's encouraging that we are seeing, some growth. On that last report that you gave us, again, is that the testing, the students took the testing in their homes, or that was taken at school?
So again, the fall was mostly at their homes.
Okay.
And then the mid-year, it depended if you were Livonia virtual, you took it at home. If you were in person, we gave it in person.
Okay, because that would, again, I know it's hard to, like you said, to analyze the data based on all the different scenarios of where the students were, or where they took the test, how they did it. And, but it is, for me, it looks encouraging. Again, I know we have a lot of work to do, obviously, on getting our literacy up and going, and our math, and getting these kids even higher. But I was also too expecting that we might see a drop based on the circumstances that we're in. And so that encourages me to see this. It'll be very interesting to see what the end of the year result looks like, because there has been so much change and tumultuous turmoil with these kids going back and forth, and a lot of other things factor into all these testing, and fatigue, and taking the test. All of those factor in, but it looks more encouraging to me, at least. And hats off to you for all the data and all the hard work that you do. It's really important that we do look at this data, and especially as we're moving forward with these Esser funds, and how are we gonna, what are we gonna use them for, and how can we best meet the needs of our learners. So thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Hillard really did a yeoman's work in about 36 hours since the testing ended. So really, it's hats off to Mr. Hillard. And then we had some great conversations about what does the data say, and we are hesitant. We're like, we got to wait. We have to talk to some more people. So the other really nice part about iReady is it really gives us some instructional things that teachers can take and say, so it looks like 75% of my class are missing this part, and I can start to add that into my instruction. And that's definitely one of the strengths of this program, is that this assessment gives us things to teach the next day. I can pull a small group that has a hole. If most of my kids are missing it, I can add it into my tier 1. And so once schools and start having their data dives, then they'll dig in and really look at what they can start adding into what they do.
Yes, that iReady really hones in on the specific detail as to what concept they're missing and everything. So it's encouraging. It's better than I thought it was going to be. So that's a really good thing. And just really proud of our teachers in the district, and going back to everything that they've endured this year. We are seeing some progress, and that's something that we should really be proud of. So thank you.
Absolutely. Our teachers are amazing.
I was going to say, kind of echo Ms. Bradford's sentiments as well in terms of the data, and just say that this is also a testament to our staff and our teachers. They're putting in the work, and we can see that they're making significant impact as they always do. So just shout out to our teaching staff. They're in the trenches and they're getting the work done.
Absolutely.
And any other comments? I said Ms. Bradford raised her hand.
You're muted, Karen. Karen?
Whoops. Yep, got it. Thank you. Okay, quick question. This is going to be is only reported out tonight, or will it be reported out on the 22nd?
Nope, just tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm done.
So we'll have the opportunity after we have our final administration in the spring to then take a look at the full year. And at that point in time, we'll have an opportunity, if you'd like, Mrs. Acosta, and working with President Burton as well. What we've done in the past is we've taken you through a deeper dive in a study session, and almost similar to a district data dive like we did last year. We could certainly do that again this year as these assessments come through, and as we have the 3 levels of administration. And then we can really dig into by level, by subgroup, and have some further dialogue if you'd like to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
And that concludes 4B.
Okay, great. Thank you. At this point, we are at item 5, building in sight, and I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Centers.
All right, we have 3 items this evening. Mr. Francis will be presenting for us. The first item is bid results for Frost Middle School roof replacement.
Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Great.
We have the board. We shared with you the letter from Plant Moran Cressa and Roofing Technology Associates, and the bid pack cost summaries were in there as well. A quick summation and taking you back briefly. This project was originally slated for the summer of 22. After the bids that we had done a few months ago and the board had already approved Riley, Hayes, and Randolph roofing replacement projects for the summer of 21. The team sat down with Allison and we talked about the sinking fund, how it's looking, the savings that we had in some previous projects, and decided to bring forward another project for roofing replacement for 21. So we landed on Frost. Again, it was due up in summer of 22. We brought it forward to summer of 21, and we have in front of you the bid results and the recommendation for Lutz Roofing. We had 2 bidders, and as I mentioned in my memo, and as you can see in the bid results, we had, for pure dollar amount, a lower bid from another company, but upon the post bid interviews, that company had told us that they could not meet our timeline. Their intention was to complete approximately a third of the roof in the summer of 21, and then they wanted to come back in the summer of 22 and complete the rest of the roof, and that just did not meet the requirements of the bid. We want to have this roof done all at one time in the summer of 21. So we, with that said, Lutz is a company that we have worked with in the past. They are a large outfit. They actually are not only able to meet our timeline, they're pretty certain they can beat our timeline. They intend to put 2 crews on this roof this coming summer. Their bid amount, their final cost is actually a little bit under actually what our 10-year facility plan had listed for the anticipated cost. What we did is we actually had it costing even more because we have it escalated out to summer of 22. We brought back that escalation and came up with the budget amount of $2,360,000, with the actual coming in at under 2.3. So right on track with what we thought it would be. You might notice in the cost summary, we have a budgeted 8% contingency, but an actual 6%. What we've also learned in the past few years is that we haven't had, we've been able to give back the vast majority of the contingency for each of our summer roofing projects. So as a team, we decided to bring it down a couple of percentage points, and never wanting to run short. You never know, on any given summer, on any given project, something can happen. But we have noticed that we feel comfortable with going from 8 to 6% on contingency. So the total project cost for Frost with contingency, $2,418,920, is what we are recommending to you.
Any questions, comments? Mrs. Burton.
Mr. Francis, just to confirm, this is a complete roof replacement, right?
Correct.
'Cause-
It is.
okay.
Yeah, all of our projects that we've been doing are complete roof replacements. Some have fascia that get replaced, some do not. Frost has fascia. We are not replacing it at this time, which is another very large cost. So this is strictly the roof.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Request for this to go on to the next voting meeting, please.
Excellent. Yeah, I just want to say that, this clearly we won't, we need our projects to be in the timeline of, it becomes quite the hindrance sometimes when we're doing large projects like that. So it's important that they get done in our desired timeframes. So looking forward to getting a new roof on Frost there. Sorry, Tony, we couldn't get to you a little bit earlier. I hope you didn't leak too much on your desk at Frost.
Actually, he could probably attest to that there were some leaks and are some leaks at Frost. That's why we also brought it forward. It's probably our number one work order for roof issues. So we're happy to pull it up a year.
Great. Great. We'll move on to item B then. This is the bid results for the central office building abatement. Mr. Francis.
Thank you. We have for recommended the vendor of Global Green Services Group at $70,060 to complete the abatement this June in the administration building. That would be the first order of business with regard to the renovation project at the central office administration building. It's actually a very light amount of abatement that's required in that building. Over the time we've been doing some, as you know, we did the basement level recently, and we had some abatement downstairs that we had already taken care of. Essentially, there are some floor tiles that are hot and the mastic is not, so there won't be any grinding. All of those walls, the wood looking walls that we have throughout, those have asbestos in them. Those would all be removed, but it's really a light overall light asbestos demolition. And really we've built in about 12 working days for it, which all parties involved are fairly confident will be done in less than that. But we wanted to make sure we had a schedule that certainly had it completed. But we think this is a relatively short job and the kickoff basically to the renovation this summer. So they're set to begin right after Memorial Weekend.
Excellent. Questions or comments? All right. Well, that'll be very fortunate to have that abated before the project goes into major construction. So again, is this on regular agenda?
Please. This will handle quite a bit of demolition. By the time the GC gets in there, all the walls will be down except for the block walls. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, that brings us on to item C, which is the boiler replacement at 8 buildings.
Excuse me, Mr. Francis. Mr. Centers, if I may interrupt, I'm going to be abstaining from the discussion and the vote on this item because my family's company bid to a company that appears on some of these bid documents. For that reason, I'll abstain from the discussion and the vote.
I'm going to apologize in advance, but I can't help but say the pun that I'm very fired up about the boiler project this summer. So yes, I know. Sorry. I apologize. However, we have 8 buildings. Okay. And we have a real quick list of them: Cooper Elementary, Grant Elementary, Rosedale, Garfield Community School, Webster Elementary, and then 3 different buildings on the central office campus. One is the administration building, which this actually coincidentally was always scheduled to happen this summer, to have the boiler in the admin buildings replaced. It goes along very nicely with the fact that the renovation will occur at the same time. We have the maintenance building in the Armco building. I know the question has come up. What is the Armco building? It's the smaller building that we have that's located between the maintenance building and the warehouse building. It's essentially an extension to the maintenance building. There's a wood shop in there and some other things. And I actually had to ask one of our historians as to where the name Armco comes from. And if you call Wayne Roberts, who retired a few years back, he has stated, per Wayne, which is a pretty good source, that Armco is short for Army Corps of Engineers, who built it many years ago for the district. So that's why it's called the Armco building. But all 8 of those will have new boilers. As you can see from my memo, we have 2 companies that have that we are looking to award projects to. System Corporation, which has done quite a bit of work in the district. They've done some of our boiler projects. They've done high school boilers for the pools. System has, we would like to award or recommend for award System to 6 of the 8 buildings. And we have the second company, which is Engineered Comfort Systems, which we are looking to have Rosedale and Webster be completed by. By looking at the pure dollar amounts, the lowest dollar bids came in mostly from Engineered Comfort Systems. However, as I explained in the memo, we are recommending as the low responsible bidder System for 6 of these buildings. We have some concerns over the numbers that were bid by Engineered Comfort Systems. We've never used them before. We are always open to building new relationships, but in the best interest of the district, after much discussion and deliberation, we have decided to recommend to the board, again, System, who was second low on many of these, but we are comfortable, we are confident, and we know of their services, and they have done very good work for the district. They have saved us money in the past on their work. And in the meantime, we also would like to open up new avenues with other vendors and other companies. So we would like to do 2 of our smaller buildings, which 2 elementary sized buildings, and give them the opportunity, much like we did a year ago, where Detroit Boiler, we gave Emerson to do that work. It was better for us to not give them too much with not knowing the background, and System completed the others. So that is the basis of our recommendation with regard to the dollar amounts bid, our concern for how low some of those were bid out specifically by Engineered Comfort Systems, but at the same time, knowing that we can keep a handle on 2 smaller buildings and seeing where that work goes for us this summer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Francis. I'm glad you pointed out that this is something we have done in the past. We obviously, our heating cooling systems are incredibly important, especially our heating systems. So I like the diligence of making sure that a bulk of the work is done with reliable contractors and seeing how it goes with the others personally. Do others have questions or comments?
In the end, the total amount is still under what we had budgeted out of our 10-year facilities plan for the overall summer's work on boilers.
Yeah, that's great. They did, the bids came in very competitively.
They did. We had several bidders.
Absolutely. Mr. Johnson, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Centers. Phil, given that we have not used Engineered Comfort in the past, and looking at the actual bid results, is there a particular reason why perhaps we didn't give them some of the smaller projects like Armco or the maintenance building as opposed to the schools?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned those 2 specifically. Those are 2 that were the most worrisome with the amount that was bid, that it was $30,000 less than the next lowest bidder, and far more tens of thousands of dollars less than other bidders. We were not certain that was potentially something was missed in that bid.
Yeah, I sort of suspected that because looking at the Rosedale and the Webster, the percentages weren't as great as the other two, and I had a hunch that maybe that's the reason why, is they were closer on the other two and too far apart on the real low bid. So, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Centers.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anyone else? All right. Mr. Francis, again, we'd like to see that on the regular agenda.
Yes, please.
Thank you. President Burden, that concludes building and site.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is item 6, policy. Mr. Johnson, is there anything this evening?
Thank you, President Burton. We have nothing on the agenda tonight, but as I received a number of emails from you today with some work to look at, I suspect that we're going to be having some of these in the not too distant future. So stay tuned.
Sounds good. Next item on our agenda is item 7, Personnel Committee. Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, President Burton. I believe we do not have anything at this time tonight. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. And item 7 is our Legislative Committee. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you, President Burton. The only thing I was going to remind everyone was about the Michigan Department of Ed soliciting public input regarding the waiver for the end of the year testing, but that was already mentioned earlier in the meeting. Other than that, I don't have anything. Mrs. Oquist, do you?
Other than the 2 items we discussed, I do not.
Thank you. President Burton, that concludes legislative.
Terrific. This is a shorter meeting than is typical for a committee of the whole for this group, but that's kind of a welcome little break every now and then. There's nothing else on our agenda this evening. We thank those of you who are tuning in to keep an eye on our school district and our Board of Education, and we wish you all a very nice evening. Our meeting is adjourned.